Okay, fantastic. Hello to all of you. If you could please take your seats, and while I welcome you to the session, Accelerating Access to Clean Air for a Livable Planet. And the session, just as the overall event to which WHO brought us together here in Cartagena, is very timely and very needed. 9 out of 10 people breathe air that doesn't meet the WHO guidelines for safe air, and that means the very act of breathing that we depend on to keep us alive makes us sick as well, and that's unacceptable, and I think everybody in the room here agrees to that. We all know that there has been progress. We have new numbers. We have seen the share of cities that meet PM 2.5 standards rising from 9% to 17%. That's all good news, but it's not enough, and we know that. We need to accelerate our actions, and I think the session title here frames the discussion very much as an access question, and that's interesting because it does hint also to the inequalities that do prevail. And we heard about that earlier this morning already in the session, with the air quality being between 10 and 20 times worse than in other places, and some places with regard to others. And obviously that means it's an issue of inequalities and vulnerability. Now, the World Bank will launch today the Accelerating Access to Clean Air for Livable Planning report. And with this new evidence that will be shared with us on an integrated policy approach that could cut death attributable to air pollution while delivering also economic benefits. So this is really interesting. We look forward to the findings and recommendations that we will hear about shortly. And we'll then move into a panel discussion to gain insights from experiences and challenges faced by countries in accelerating access to clean air. And we will also discuss how we can mobilize finance for this approach. There's a critical finance gap. We also know that. It's too little money going into this area, although it's so critically important. And then on top, the money that is available is concentrated in a few spaces. Now, those who know me know that I'm heading the Secretariat of the UNEP-convened Climate and Clean Air Coalition, a partnership with over 200 country IGO and NGO partners to tackle superpollutants. So the specific angle does put us at the intersection of climate and clean air, because both are mutually reinforcing, and the practical solutions to cut the superpollutants help us to do good on both sides. So we have a double dividend coming out here. So when I hear integrated approaches, I'm all in. So very briefly, the CCAC Clean Air Flagship has 5 buckets of action. That's something we have done with a number of the partners here in the room as well. And I have to recognize Sandeep was part of the early discussions in that as well. So we're very happy about the collaboration that we have seen with the World Bank on this. And besides, obviously, the finance gap that there is a capacity gap, and that's where we have this air quality management exchange platform that we showed already yesterday to some extent. It will have a real session on Friday. And then the other element that I wanted to highlight is that we absolutely need to make the economic case. So I'm very curious what is in the report here already, but we're working on a piece here as well with new modeling and so on that will help us hopefully make more of a case. And I think that's needed in the situation that we're in with dwindling resources, that we see resources being put to other things than this topic here. So with that, I would like to introduce 2 amazing colleagues from the World Bank who will present the report. And first comes Helena Naber, the Senior Environmental Specialist at the bank. And then we'll have Sandeep Kohli, a Senior Energy Specialist at the bank. And I don't know whether you want to come up both at once. That's perfectly fine. And I leave you the spot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, for the introduction, and thank you to the participants and to the organizers for being here. Okay, so as you know, ambient air pollution accounted for more than 5.7 million deaths globally in 2020, with corresponding economic damages estimated at about 4.5 to 6.1 trillion a year, which is equivalent to about 5% of GDP at the global level. And this is solely due to outdoor air pollution. Ambient air pollution remains a leading risk factor, as Martina has mentioned, for premature death and, of course, for morbidity. And poverty and inequality, as we have heard earlier today, compound the health burden caused by being exposed to air pollution. So only about 8% of the global population was exposed to PM 2.5 levels that are within the WHO PM 2.5 guidelines of 5 micrograms per cubic meter. 1 in 3 people globally, which is over 2.5 billion, are exposed to fine particulate matter levels in outdoor air pollution that are above interim target 1 of the WHO, which is 35 microgram per cubic meter. And half of these people lived in South Asia, about 1/4 in Northeast Asia, and about 330 million in sub-Saharan Africa. Almost 45%, which is half of the global populations, are exposed to outdoor air pollution levels that are above the interim target 2 of the WHO, which is 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And of these people, over 700 million live in low-income regions, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Within the world's regions, if we just look at within the regions, about over 60% of people who live in South Asia and who live in MENA are exposed to levels above interim target 3, which is more than 35 microgram per cubic meter. And focusing on WHO interim target 2, which is 25 microgram per cubic meter, more than 80% of people living in South Asia and in the Middle East are exposed to that level, 60% of those who live in Northeast Asia, and around 50% of those who live in North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. So while in some regions, desert dust dominates as source of PM 2.5, anthropogenic emissions account for over 50% of PM of the number of people who are exposed to PM 2.5. And almost 30% of the anthropogenic contributions are coming from households. This is heating and cooking with biomass and with dirty fuels, and many in low and middle income countries. Residential household cooking as a contribution dominates in Africa. Industrial sources and power generation are important sources in South Asia and Northeast Asia and Middle East and North Africa. This means that there is significant potential for air quality improvement from policy interventions. By 2040, existing or planned policies and air quality measures are expected to curb global PM 2.5 emissions by about 6%. However, due to economic and population growth, the number of people exposed to PM 2.5 levels exceeding 35 microgram per cubic meter is anticipated to increase by 15%. And the number of people who are exposed to levels above 25 microgram per cubic meter will increase by 21%. By then, global mortality attributable to outdoor air pollution is expected to increase from 5.7 million in 2020 to about 6.2 million deaths in 2040. Most of the growth in the number of people exposed to outdoor air pollution and mortality is expected to be mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, where average exposure levels will increase primarily due to rising anthropogenic emissions. However, substantial improvement is possible. Reducing the number of people exposed to PM 2.5 concentrations above 25 microgram per meter globally by 2040 by half is both feasible and can be affordable. An integrated approach combining conventional air quality management measures with energy and climate policies that are designed to achieve other goals such as energy independence or reducing greenhouse gas emissions could achieve substantial progress towards closing the PM 2.5 exposure gap by 2040, reducing and reduce mortality that is associated with outdoor air pollution. Compared to current policy scenario, mortality can be decreased from 6.2 million in 2040, that is if the current policies and the planned policies are fully implemented, to 4.2 million under an integrated approach, with an estimated economic benefits ranging between 1.9 trillion and 2.4 in 2021 terms over the period, which would be equivalent between 0.8% and 2.1% of global GDP in 2040. So the analysis at the targets that were set for the analysis is to try to be more equalized across regions so that all the regions see a reduction, is to halve the number of people that breathe polluted air from PM 2.5 from all sources in concentrations above 25 microgram per cubic meter. The exception was done to regions that have very high dust levels, which is Middle East, Central Africa, and there the target was to reduce the anthropogenic emissions to below to 5 microgram per cubic meter or less, because we did not do analysis on the desert dust. So, of course, as you see, regions where dust is an important contributor require further efforts to reduce anthropogenic contributions. So, an integrated approach will see low-income regions would benefit the most from implementing such an approach, and the greatest improvements would be seen in Northeast Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Integrated policies would also deliver significant net climate mitigation gains. They are likely to deliver up to 40% net reduction in the overall global warming potential over 100 years, and of these, 80% would be due to energy and climate policies, and about 20% would be due to clean air measures, particularly those that abate methane and black carbon emissions in municipal waste management, agriculture, and transport. It would also reduce black carbon emissions by almost 2/3, and carbon monoxide emissions by more than half relative to 2020. Across world regions, differences in geophysical and economic conditions and the status of already implemented policies will provide a diverse picture regarding the potential abatement of different policies and measures across sectors. So achieving the clean air targets in a cost-effective manner will require interventions across all sectors. It will not be possible to achieve the clean air targets by reducing only in one or two sectors. Reductions would need to be done across all sectors. The residential sector is expected to generate more than half of the exposure reductions needed to achieve the clean air targets globally. In Sub-Saharan Africa, which you see is the first column, and Southern Africa, more than 50% of total exposure reductions are expected to come from measures to address the use of solid fuels, including biomass, in household cooking. The agriculture sector, particularly large-scale industrial farming, is a significant source of PM 2.5 pollution, particularly from the open burning of waste and fertilizer. And despite being negatively affected by it, and a reorientation of financial support for farmers and investments to advance agricultural knowledge and identify and deploy innovative systems would facilitate the reduction of air pollution from these agricultural sources. In most regions, further control of industrial emissions are expected to account for about a quarter of total exposure reductions, reaching closer to 50% in West Asia and Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. Vehicle emissions control are expected to account for 40% of total reductions in North Africa and less about 20% in other regions. So different geophysical and economic conditions and the status of already implemented policies will provide a diverse picture regarding the potential abatement of different policies and measures across sectors. In many low and middle income countries, reducing the number of people exposed to levels of PM 2.5 exceeding 25 microgram per cubic meter by 2040 will include efforts to reduce pollution from residential heating and cooking sector, which directly contributes to outdoor air pollution. And of course, reducing the residential will support to reduce the indoor air pollution as well, which we do not analyze and we do not estimate the benefits from reducing the indoor air pollutions. So the averted mortality here is basically due to averted mortality from outdoor exposure. Reducing exposure from desert dust and soil will prove more challenging. We haven't modeled it in our analysis, but landscape restoration has a clear role to play in addressing air pollution from desert and soil dust, particularly in urban areas. So while these specific priorities will depend on country and regional context, any successful policies and measures will need to hinge on three actions. The first one is strengthening institutions. The second is leveraging information and prioritizing across policies and measures. And the third one is to catalyze investments. Effective air quality management would require strong policy frameworks backed by a long-term, cross-sectoral plan, effective governance, and capable, resourced institutions. Beyond all, it will require the high-level political will to act. Countries that have successfully curbed air pollution have placed clean air at the center of the government's economic and welfare agenda, making it an explicit public policy goal championed at the highest levels of the government. So the second key is to set a foundation of sound evidence for clean air policies and investments. Information about sources, impacts, and drivers of air pollution is the key to unlock action. However, most low and middle-income countries still face substantial information gaps. However, that is not reason to delay action, because action is urgent to be able to achieve the targets by 2040. And there is sufficient global knowledge already to start now, and as better information becomes available, it can help make pollution reduction faster and most cost-effective.
Thank you so much, Helena, for sort of laying out the background to basically the findings, the modeling work, and so forth. And so what I wanted to do in the remaining presentation is focus on the financing aspects, of course, but also I think it's important to mention that when we look at what is needed in terms of money, we're talking about something like 3.2 trillion. What that is translating to is an annual increase that you need from about 8.5 billion to nearly 14 billion annually. And what that means is we've got to, we've got to make not just the economic case, but we've got to see how does the actual financing come in. What we see here is that on the public sector side, there is limited resource and funding. Many of the countries that are going to be affected are countries that are going to be in lower and middle income levels. And so it's not that they have unlimited budgets. At the same point in time, when you look at the private sector, there is reticence because obviously they would want returns and they would want clarity in terms of policy, clarity in terms of what risks are theirs, and what indeed is the end result that they're supposed to be able to deliver in a measurable manner. And with that, let me just move the slide. So what I'm talking about really is this, I should say, gap between the economic case, which has already been made, in my view, very, very strongly, that when you have cleaner air, you have lower mortality, lower morbidity, increased productivity, and something like approximately, I believe, 10% of GDP affected if you have bad air. The effects are there. But at the same time, we are not being able to translate that economic case into the financing, and that's the challenge. I've mentioned already that in terms of the public sector, there are these budgetary constraints, but it's more than just a budgetary constraint. When we talk about an integrated approach towards managing or towards alleviating pollution, it means that we have to have the institutional capacities, the clarity in terms of policy, but also we cannot have sort of just one institution. For example, let's take the power sector. If they are just doing their job, putting in electrostatic precipitators, which will stop some of the PM 2.5 coming from the larger sources of pollution, the power plants. But at the same point in time, if you have not taken care of the transport sector, or the burning of crops, or the residential sector that Helena mentioned contributes about 30% of the PM 2.5 burden, then you will not see the results on the ground. And therefore, this integrated approach means that you have to take it at the highest level, and from the public sector, the ability to affect change in several sectors is what will basically provide the needed confidence for private enterprise to come in, and for the monies that we talk about that are needed to actually start getting mobilized in a collaborative manner between the public and the private sectors. There's a bunch of solutions that we've got as bullet points there, which are easy as bullet points, but really they are difficult to implement. And so we need to work together towards doing that. I think the strengthening and harmonizing of results and of the monitoring side, and having it very, very robust and having it reliable, I think is the first thing, so that the indices are there that can be followed. Then we look at the blend of concessionality. So as we said, there is limited budget that many governments will be having. So when you are looking at, let's say, the financing of one piece on clean air, you will need to supplement with some budgetary support the kinds of activities that on their own are not going to be commercially viable for the private sector to come in. And so when you blend those, the public and private sector type of financing, or putting it differently, when you add in a level of concessionality to the blended funding, you don't want to overdo the level of concessionality, but you don't want to underdo it too, because in both cases, it will affect how much market penetration you're going to get and what results are going to be there. We've also got to have simplified and integrated risk mitigation instruments. So for example, if I'm a private investor, I should be able to see what are really my risks, and the type of risks that fall into the private sector pot should be those that the private sector is in the best position to take, whereas those that are not amenable to private risk-taking should be ones that fall into the pot of the governments. And I think, let's take the next slide where I think we can run through some of the types of shades and examples of this. So first of all, let me start by saying we've focused, and Helena mentioned that earlier, that 30% of what we are seeing in terms of PM 2.5, it's coming from residential sector energy use in a way. And putting it differently, I would say we're looking at distributed pollution sources, because if I go beyond the energy sector, we're talking about crop burning, we're talking about other, the transport sector, vehicular traffic. These are all distributed sources of pollution. And so it's not like one power plant where you can add a precipitator and you can sort the problem, but rather you have to deal with multiple stakeholders and there'll be multiple changes needed. So going back to the three examples, let's take the first one where you're talking about crop residue burning and how to prevent it. Well, you will need to have a certain amount of subsidy coming in for the farmer to adopt alternate practices than burning crop residue. And in India, that's one of the things that's being worked on, where there is $164 million for managing that, the residue. And then, of course, you have to look into how you can mobilize carbon markets, how you may look at other value chain additions, where, for example, the crop residue can be used for something different and produce products that are valued. So that's one example. Moving on to, so this example, basically what we're highlighting is that you absolutely will need the implementation of alternate measures, but you're not going to get there unless there is this intervention with public money. The next one I wanted to pick up is from the transport sector and the country Mauritius. And over here, if you've got vehicles that are high emission vehicles and you want to get them cleaner or moved to other alternatives, once again, the people who are going to be buying these vehicles are either fleet operators that may be within the government sector, but largely they're going to be private players. And so the regulations that you put in place will determine the type of vehicles people will buy. And it will also determine how you can get vehicles that are more polluting or highly polluting off the road. So once again, there's a bunch of bullet points down there in terms of potential solutions, where you go in for incentivizing cleaner vehicle purchases, and at the same point in time, you make it more difficult to purchase the highly polluting ones or to have them on the road because of their vintage. So again, on this side, through these types of regulations, you're able to get the private sector to come in to actually change their buying patterns. And the third one, also from the transport sector in Chile, but this is more to do with replacement of more polluting buses with electric buses. And in this case, what I've tried to highlight in this example is that the financing scheme itself, where if you're going in for a lease type structure, you may make the more expensive electric vehicle something that is more affordable and may make it possible and perhaps desirable for fleet owners to look to changing towards those vehicles. Most of the points that are on this particular sheet, I've actually already talked to through the examples, but basically the idea of appropriate blending, which means that, for example, if you are looking at a certain market penetration of cleaner vehicles, just as an example, then you want to know this new cleaner vehicle, which likely is more expensive, how many years of a payback period would it have before the purchaser is able to recover that? And if you want a more rapid market penetration, then you want that payback period to shrink. And that is where the blended finance comes in, where if you are able to shrink the payback period, there will be more takers. And if I take the same example into clean cooking, then you've got different socioeconomic strata. If you want only the richest people to have an LPG cylinder and cook with LPG, then of course you will keep the prices as they are. But if you think that you want to have market penetration go lower, there is only one way, which is you make it more affordable for the next level and the next level in terms of the economic strata to be able to afford it. And that is what will enhance market penetration and increase the speed with which these technologies that are cleaner will be used in households. So how does somebody who is in constrained financially, a government, how do they go forward and find the money for some things like this? And again, this is not only a federal government issue, it is an issue that has to involve provincial governments and municipalities and so forth. But the financial instruments that can be used are some sort of green bonds, but these green bonds to date have been used mostly for renewable energy and those types of things. But you need to expand that thinking to include how you would use these green bonds for cleaner air type of projects. And then, of course, the final point about the repurposing of fossil subsidies is an important one, because clearly in many countries, you can take a small sliver, whether it's a penny, whether it's 2 pennies, of the very large subsidies that are there in the fossil sector and use it appropriately in a way to bring about change in terms of cleaner air. I think I can just sort of end it off with a few examples of projects that are there in the bank. For example, for the industrial sector, I'm not going to sort of read through each bullet point, but bottom line is, this is a project in Turkey where it's focused on the more highly polluting industries and how you can give them credit lines and financing that will allow them to change their equipment, technology. But you have to be careful that you're not simply replacing with technologies that they would have anyways adopted. These have to be something that is going to take you to the next level. In other words, use of technologies that today on their own they would not commercially purchase, but you're pushing the envelope for them to make that next step. When you look at the Indian example on this one, again, it's about providing credit, but then you create what you would call, priority sector lending, where even the private banks in the country have certain obligations to lend into certain priority sectors. And if in those priority sectors we include things like clean air, besides, of course, what's put on the slide there, which is about creating clean energy alternatives, then in any case, both of these would work towards a cleaner environment as well as the air. And I think the final example well, it's not final, there's one more next page, but the Kyrgyz Republic is another example where for household heating, if you can provide affordable loans to individual households, then these households can move towards cleaner options for heating, and the penetration of that, again, is something that you would control through the concessionality of the loans. And now I will just end with an example from Bangladesh, which is, again, in the area of distributed sources of pollution, but basically it's a hard to tackle sector, and that is to do with the small and medium industries that are not having the same bandwidth as the larger enterprises. And I think with that, let me end. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. I think that was very rich. There's a lot to unpack. Thank you. I would like to call two panelists to the stage, and one is Jane Burston, CEO of the Clean Air Fund, and Sergio Siraj Hernandez Villaseñor, and he's the Director General of Industry, Clean Energy and Air Quality Management in Semarnat. That's the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico. We were supposed to have a third person, but there was a problem with the flights. So that was the sort of sub-national element that we wanted to bring into this as well. And maybe just to say, Sergio is bringing this governmental perspective to us, and maybe let me start with you. And if there are mics over there, then I just come over because it looks awkward standing up here. For a sec. Thanks. I think it's nicer to sit next to you well, we start with Mexico City. Anyhow, and Mexico City has made considerable strides already to improve air quality through a local and also a regional approach, employing cross-sectoral solutions and addressing emissions, including from transport, solid waste, and so on. And from your experience, now we heard how important this integrated policy response is. What does it take to translate technical findings in air pollution and environmental health to decision makers to build political will? We heard that as well, that this is important, and consensus across sectors and government authorities to support the air quality programs. Maybe we start with that.
Good afternoon. I suppose that technical knowledge about air pollution and its impacts on public health is vast and compelling. However, its mere existence does not guarantee concrete actions. To translate science into public policy, it is essential to have effective and accessible communication where technical findings must be present, is clear and understandable language for decision makers and society at large. Scientific data must be transformed into messages that highlight the impact on health and economy. It is important to generate local evidence because although global studies exist, policymakers respond better to data specific to the regions or countries. Therefore, local information in terms of economical, social, and health costs can facilitate decision making. It is vital to engage stakeholders, health experts, environmentalists, economics, and other sectors in an interdisciplinary dialogue with political leaders to provide a comprehensive view of the problem and its solutions. For scientific finding to translate into effective policies, it is essential to create an environmental in which political will is translated into actions. This requires citizen mobilization and social pressure, bringing together civil society, the media, and non-government organizations to demand change. Furthermore, linking improved air quality with economic growth, reduce healthcare costs, and job creation in sustainable sector can align diverse interests and strengthen political support. Building consensus requires alliance, bringing together government, business, academia, and civil society in a space for debate and collaboration that allow for common ground and shared commitments. Finally, the implementation of successful environmental policies requires aligned local, state, and national regulation to avoid contradictions and ensure the effective implementation of environmental measures. The creation of interinstitutional committees or a specialized agency can facilitate communication and monitoring of common strategies.
Okay, fantastic. Could I ask you a quick follow-on to that about this vertical and horizontal coordination. And you said you have a group that has been set up in the government. I think that's super helpful. Are there any lessons out of that? How does this work? What is complicated in that? And sorry if I'm putting you a bit on the spot, but I think that's super interesting for everybody, because we say it's so important to do, and then it's just natural. We all stick to our silos, and it's really hard to get across.
Let me, my English is terrible, so I need to read.
Sorry. If you like, I leave you with the thought, and I turn first to Jane, if that is helpful. And maybe we can do it in Spanish as well afterwards, and we have translation here, so people do that. Maybe that's helpful as well. Let me know. I want to turn to Jane, and obviously we all know air pollution is underfunded. You have your study that you put out that gives us the numbers to that. We now heard as well from the bank how we can go about a few things. What do you think does it take to get our collective efforts for clean air to scale? And you work obviously across board with governments at different levels, and obviously connecting between the philanthropic efforts and also the MDBs and so on that we have here. So over to you.
Thank you. And can I first of all say congratulations to the World Bank, because it's a delight to see the flagship project up and launched. I didn't catch when it will be on the website, but if we could hear that by the end, that would be amazing. I'm assuming maybe today, but let us know if not. I think it's a very much needed report, and it's really good to keep seeing the World Bank pushing air quality across all of its different sectoral projects and encouraging integration with climate action. Especially given the political headwinds that we and they are facing. I think we really need to be on the front foot with doing that. And this new data has showed the huge benefit that it can bring to financing agendas. So yes, our State of Global Air Quality Funding report is something that we bring out every year. There's always a bit of a lag in the data. So the last year for which data was comprehensively available was 2022. And what we saw was, and we keep seeing, air quality funding is by no means, and it's just nowhere near related to the scale of the problem. It's about 1% of international development finance spent on outdoor air quality projects, that is. And you would think that lots of climate finance was, because of these points that the World Bank is making very well in these new charts, was dedicated to tackling air quality too, and it's just not the case. Only about 3% of international climate finance is purposefully dedicated to reducing pollution at the same time. So we're just missing out on a lot of potential benefit there. So you asked what might help it scale up, and I thought of three things. Number one, I think accounting, just getting more development banks and development agencies to account for the air quality impact of their projects. One good example is the new World Bank indicators. They've massively reduced from, I don't know how many indicators, down to a certain set of KPIs, and then 12 country context indicators. And one of those 12 is on air quality. So staff across the bank need to show how their project is going to help that. There's a project that we're working on with the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. It's a toolkit for project offices to integrate air quality across their sectoral projects. So the kinds of thing that the examples that have been given in Turkey and India and so on, how can air quality be added on to something that was already being done? So that's number one, account for the benefit. Number two, I think calculate then the economic gains that additional reductions in air pollution bring. Because of this lack of integration across air quality and climate finance, a while back, we looked into the McKinsey abatement cost curve and realized that the ROI in there does not include the economic benefits related to the health impact of reducing air pollution at the same time as greenhouse gases. And when you factor in the economic benefits related to the health impacts, which are just occurring naturally as a secondary benefit, there's a third more climate action that flips to a positive ROI. So from 16 gigatons to 24 gigatons of positive investment. So second thing, account for the economic benefits arising from the reduction in air quality too. And then the third thing, which the previous speaker covered in a lot of detail, so I won't, is use more non-traditional financial instruments. We heard a lot about blended finance. I know that 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was the IMF was trying a Breathe Better bond, and that didn't get off the ground. Now might be the kind of time, I don't know why it didn't. It would be interesting to hear what the challenges were there. But now might be the kind of time to resurrect that. And finally, we're encouraged by recent announcements that were made by the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, who for the first time have committed $1 billion in investment guarantees for air quality projects. And the first of those projects are just starting to come through. So that they're obviously for higher income countries, more middle income countries, but that's a positive step.
Fantastic, thank you, Jane. And maybe in the same way, I mean, you referred to, I mean, the guarantees certainly will help with the private sector side coming in, but maybe any other ideas how we can create markets so that the private sector really steps up? Because obviously, while all the development aid side, this will go only that far between the philanthropies and
yeah. I mean,
and
so I haven't looked into it. So this is not a well-formed thought, but just building on the points about carbon markets being used for residential cooking and indoor air quality. I do think that there's something potentially in carbon markets and the use for black carbon emissions reduction. It's not, the black carbon emissions aren't counted as part of the UNFCCC system at the minute, so can't access climate finance or carbon markets in that same way. But I think if black carbon was included in the UNFCCC, then it might, that for black carbon emissions reductions in particular, might be a useful source of finance.
Fantastic, thank you. Let me come back to Sergio. And sorry if I put you on the spot, but it was because you talked about the coordination group that you have set up. And I think we all would love to have something like that. And maybe if there's any advice that you can give to countries who don't have it yet, how you set it up, and what is difficult or what works well. You pick whether you want to take the positive or the more difficult path. And yeah, so just a little more on your experience with that, because I think it's the game changer, but it's not easy because we all are creatures that work in our silos, and we are very quick to retrieve back to those silos.
No, don't worry. We have a special group of coordination in order to reduce the pollutants, not only in Mexico City, in Mexico City and other cities that are around on Mexico City. This group is for coordinate action in order to reduce basically primary pollutants and ozone, that is a secondary pollutant. We are focused on station monitoring networks in 6 states, and we are focusing on reduce particle PM10, PM2.5, VOCs, NOx, because in Mexico City the principal trouble is ozone, and as you know, VOCs are promoted to create ozone and PM secondary. So we work with the authorities of the states, of each state, and we work with academy, we work with investors in order to define which are the action that we have to do for increase the air quality in our cities.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. We were meant to have a subnational voice here as well, and I know, Jane, you support the Breathe Cities effort. Maybe an element that you could bring in on that, the role of cities and also the way to access finance at that level. That's something we can hear about a
Sure.
bit more.
Maybe I could give you a sneak peek into the headlines of a report that's coming out on Thursday. We've looked, so Breathe Cities, just for those who have not heard of it, is a project with Bloomberg Philanthropies and C40 and the Clean Air Fund, working with mayors who want to introduce ambitious policies to reduce air pollution. Very significantly in the next 10 years, in line with whatever the WHO interim guidelines are in their place. And it does three things. It's monitoring air pollution and getting evidence around the health impacts and the economic impacts. Number two, working with grassroots organizations so that they can advocate for the sorts of policies that they want to see. And number three, technical assistance for these mayors. And this week we're launching this report that's looked at the WHO target for this conference. You'll have seen they've come up with a target that they're asking national governments to commit to, which is a halving of the health impact of air pollution for anthropogenic air pollution by 2040. So we've asked ourselves, what does that mean for, say, the biggest or a sample of 60 global cities? And it's really huge. It's 650,000 lives saved and up to $1 trillion in economic benefits. And what we see is the mayors are like super close to the source of the problem. They understand where investment is needed. They're often competing with other cities for foreign direct investment or for local company investment. And people don't want to live in polluted places, so they're much more motivated. They can't, however, access a lot of the ODA finance. In some countries, cities can directly access it. In most countries, they can't. So I think one lesson for national governments is figure out where the dedicated mayors are and help to channel the finance to those places and focus on the areas where the political will is high, which tends to be cities over national governments, we find.
Thanks very much, Jane. And maybe Sergio, if I come back to you on that as well, the collaboration between the national and the local level, or any other opportunity for cooperation that you see is coming out of what we learned as well from the bank.
Can you repeat the question again?
Puede ser la cooperación.
Okay. Está bien, está bien. Yeah, the federal cooperation in order to reduce the pollutants is make standards to make standards for industry, for vehicles. Right now, Mexico has Euro 6 for vehicles, for diesel vehicles, and we are working in order to has Tier 2 BIN 5 for light-duty vehicles. We are try to has electricity mobility in some places, and we work with them in order to provide environmental capacitation for emission review vehicles, EM programs for all the country, and for air quality frameworks. So is the main role that we have.
Thank you so much. Jane, a 30-second on a takeaway. Where can we collaborate? What comes out of this?
I mean, one of the things I'm taking away, just having seen the World Bank presentation, is that yay, we finally have a target for the amount of money that we need. And I had a question, if there's any time at all, to hear how that was calculated, because I feel like we've both been, the air quality movement as a whole has both been lacking a kind of positive target to aim for, which the World Health Organization has now provided us with this halving of human health impacts. We haven't had the 1.5 degrees, we haven't had the doubling of energy efficiency or the trebling of renewables like other parts of the movement. So this is a good line in the sand, and it's positive and it's not deaths focused. So that's excellent. And then we also haven't had, and how much does it cost to get there? So I think that is the number that I'm taking away, and the positivity for now having both of these two targets to aim for.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane. And with that, I would like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. Round of applause. Thank you. And I hand over to Jiang Ru, the Manager, Global Department for Environment at the bank, for closing remarks.
As Martina mentioned, my name is Jiang Ru. I'm one of 2 managers at the Global Environment Department of the World Bank. Actually, I'm overseeing the delivery of this report from the bank side. I think to close this session, definitely want to thank Martina for your excellent moderation and for this report presentation and for the panel's discussion. I definitely want to thank our 2 panelists, Sergio and Jen, for your insightful comments, for sharing Mexico's experience, sharing CAF's activities on this particular agenda. Unfortunately, we invited Dr. Ajayi from Lagos EPA, and he couldn't get his visa, and we tried to make him connect online, and he couldn't connect. So we missed that element of discussion, but I want to thank him for trying to be part of our discussion. I also want to thank Helena, Sandeep, and the team for delivering this impactful report for the World Bank. From today's discussion, I'm also very happy to learn from our panelists the overall endorsement of the bank's report's finding. Particularly this impactful message, we needed to work across sectors, we needed to work across jurisdictions, and we needed to also combine our efforts on air quality management, climate mitigation, and energy transition to push this agenda. With these efforts, we will achieve a very ambitious objective. I want to highlight this particular target we mentioned in our report. We have communicated with the WHO before this conference, and our colleague from WHO have kindly confirmed our target more or less are in line with WHO's global target, which will be announced this Thursday. For next step, I think Jan asked a very good question, right? How do we calculate the money? Where can we mobilize the resources? I think that's a challenge for us for sure. The bank, we will look forward to working with all partners to promote this agenda, promote this integrated approach to our lending operations on the ground, right? We do have our investment operation in different sectors. How do we leverage those operations to integrate air quality agenda into such operations to generate not only development benefits, economic benefits, but also air quality management benefits and the public health benefit. That's the task we're trying to achieve trying to promote from our side. But in short, I think from our side, we want to highlight tackling air pollution issue from the source of such pollution is most cost-effective and most cost-efficient approach. So in this regard, I think also responded to Sandeep and Jan's comments on the financing gap and this blended finance options or questions or points. I think we want to see very clearly, right? We won't be able to achieve this agenda or promote this agenda alone. We need partners. We definitely welcome all partners at this conference. If you're interested in learning more about our air quality management operations, if you're interested in exploring potential collaboration opportunities with the World Bank, please come to our delegation. We're open to all kind of discussion, right? We cannot guarantee we will be able to work on whatever initiative we might have, but we are here and we want to explore opportunities. Please come to us. I think two more events from the bank side I want to highlight. And tomorrow we will have a featured event, similar launch event. Title is Clean Air for All. You might already receive some flyer we left on the table. But for us, this is our stellar efforts in terms of a regional cooperation to improve air pollution in the Indo-Gangetic Plain and Himalayan foothill, right? Home to 875 million people across Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. You will learn how the bank have worked with different government, mobilizing resources and to promote regional collaboration on this important agenda. Our second event I want to highlight is our regional director for Latin American region, Benhua Bosque. He will deliver a short presentation of our flagship report at our plenary session. I think that presentation will be important because hopefully there are more decision makers attending that session, and then he can convey such powerful message to those decision makers. And responding to Jan's question, our report will go live on Thursday, as well as your report. Yes. I think with this, I thank you all for attending today's event. We look forward to our continued discussion. As I mentioned, please come to us if you have ideas, if you want to learn more about our activities. Let's discuss further. I wish you a wonderful experience at this conference and also hopefully at this beautiful city of Cartagena. Thank you. Very good question. In Benhua's presentation, we will put the QR code you can scan. I think we will also leave some flyers on Thursday, correct? Yes, yes. But for our bank's publication, you can just search online. Use Google. Sometime it will be very easy. You can type in the title of the presentation. You will find our report easily. But we will have the QR codes for sure. Thank you.